Hello, baby.
Hello, Gabby.
Welcome to potty number 1 of 2024.
Woo!
So nice to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And I really do appreciate your time and your... Oh, hello. Anyway, I don't know if you guys remember Ray, but I've had Ray on a couple of times. She is an absolute gem and somebody I love to go to when I have cryptic things going on in my mind to find another opinion. So we had a little conversation last year at one point, and we touched on the clairs of intuition. I'd love to share with the people a little bit on that, if you wouldn't mind elaborating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's basically a way, and well, this is my understanding, so I could be wrong, but the way that it was taught to me is, so we have our senses, touch, taste, smell, etc. And then beyond those senses, we have different clairs. So it's like clairvoyance is seeing, clairaudience is when you hear, clairsentience is when you feel, and claircognizant is when you just know. So it's, for me, like we all have all of those clairs available to us, so they're just extra senses. So for me, clairvoyance is my strongest as far as whether I'm imagining, problem solving, if an answer drops in, meditation, whatever, I'm mostly visual. So I mostly see. And then for some people, especially, comments of people that in meditation, they hear other people describing these things of like, okay, then I arrived to this room and I saw this person or whatever, and they can get really disappointed because they don't visually see anything. But then when you ask them, they will feel it. Yeah. So it's like I always say to people, well, how does your imagination work best? Are you feeling it? Do you hear the answers? Do you see the answers? Or do you just come to a knowing to figure out which one of theirs is potentially more dominant, so that, once you have an experience of understanding which one is you're more dominant, then you can generally broaden out into those other things. Yeah. But yeah, it's just like senses beyond our senses. And it's just, to me, the only reason why it's really important is knowing that those things are available to us. Like whether it is through imagination, whether it is through inquiry, whether it is through whatever, so that we can just trust ourselves a little bit more and arrive to our answers more intuitively of the information that's there that's probably non-physical.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, eh? Because that when you know thing, I've never been able to really quantify or to put it on give it a name or something like that.
Yeah. I think it's like one of those things of, sometimes when we just know, sometimes it's so strong that you can't override it, and other times we're like, oh yeah, but do I know that because of this or whatever? Then we go into the head of logical explanation, and it's that little bit of course there's all different kinds of like romantic love, and there can be romantic love with pathology, but I think one of the easiest things is, when you love someone, even if we take it non-romantically, even if we say like a sibling, I just know I love them. Yeah. I don't need logical information, I don't need this. It's just a knowing that I know, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's cool. So I'm practicing, obviously, this loving awareness stuff and loving and sending the love and all that jazz. What is the difference between like romantic love and just that love that I'm trying to practice? Like, other than sex, obviously.
Yeah. So I guess like that thing of, romantic love is when we want to take it into the physical. Love is, I guess, encompasses all things when it's, maybe that's not included. Like, you and I can quite freely love each other, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to bed each other. Yeah. I think one of the traps of romantic love is a lot of the time, if it is romantic, we want to keep that person for ourselves. Yeah. Whereas when it's non-romantic love, you don't need to capture, control, anything like that. Yeah. Towards that person. You love that person so much that they are free to do as they will. Even if that means the best thing for them is to not have you in their life. You love them enough that you are willing to give up whatever sense of role or entitlement or whatever you have, whatever attachment you have to that person, you just love them anyway. Yeah. So ultimately we want to get to that in romantic love as well, but for the meantime, while we're all mere mortals, romantic love is basically when we want to either take it to the physical or there's a lot more strings to that of we generally want to take ownership of that person, like they are my romantic partner, no one else's romantic partner, etc.
Yeah. Well said. I like that. Yeah, you were the first person to introduce me to Ram Dass, and for a while I thought I was really practicing it, and I think I was to a degree, but then I realized that a lot of my awareness was like quite shameful awareness and like quite like hypervigilance and just like kind of unpacking how I thought why that, you know what I mean. Do you think one of the bigger keys to life is the ongoing practice of that loving awareness?
Yeah, basically. Because I think it's no different to any other practice. Even medical practice, they're still practicing. It's that thing of we go to a doctor and we assume that they know all or whatever, which in some cases hopefully they do, but we also need to understand that they're still human and they're still practicing medicine, and it's the same thing for us practicing love. It's like if you just got your medical degree, there might be somebody come in with that could be 4 different things and you might think it's A, but turns out it's actually C. But you needed to diagnose A first to realize it was wrong to get to C. So I think it's the same thing with love is just working with it, of then like being like, okay, cool, I was practicing love to the best of my ability, which brought up the fact that I'm still trapped on Okay, cool. I'm still going to practice loving awareness. I'm not going to throw that in the bin because it brought stuff up for me. Because that's half the point. Is like, okay, let's see what trying to love as freely as we can. Let's see what it brings up, and then it just shows us where we're stuck. And then it's like, okay, cool. I need to refine them. Or no different to if we're practicing yoga. It's like those first times that you go, you might not be able to touch your toes, or your muscles might ache, those sorts of things. No different to your heart will ache while you're trying to expand it, and it's like that is part of the joy of practicing. And then it's that thing if you go to yoga for some time and then all of a sudden it's easier to reach your toes, and then you might not necessarily even realize your progress because it has been so incremental that sometimes they're just really good lines in the sand of seeing ourselves develop through those things. But I think largely when we team the practice of love and then when shame is there, it's also like what we actually spoke about yesterday, but I'll just slightly recap that, is how much can I let myself into my own heart? Because and I was giving Cappy the example of like, what's something that you can completely allow into your heart. Just as an example, once again, of awareness, for me, I love ducklings so much that it wouldn't matter if a duckling was completely retarded. I would love it so much. I don't care if its beak's on backwards. I don't care if it has one of its foot stuck to its back. It's like I see a duck and it's like the cutest thing that I'm just like instantly it's like already in my heart. I won't judge it for being wrong. I'm not going to judge it for being back the front. It's just so perfect as it is. And yet generally most of us don't let ourselves into our own heart if we're not perfect. And if we, see ourselves of like, oh, well, I tripped on that, so I'm not worthy of a place in my heart. And as soon as I'm like Gandhi, then I'll be able to be in my heart. Rather than being like, no, I give myself a space in my heart. Or even if we sit there, whether it's meditation, whether you're washing the dishes, and just ask, can I actually let myself into my heart? And, for me, that's still a constant practice because I do push myself out of my own heart and get addicted to doing or whatever the thing is that I'm doing at the time, to realize, oh, wow, I don't even give myself space. And then if I'm not giving myself space in my own heart, how can I possibly project that love outwards? Because otherwise I'm just trying, and there's so much effort. I'm trying to love you. I'm trying to love my neighbor. I'm trying to love this. I'm trying to love that. And there's so much effort rather than I have a space in my heart. I let myself in for all my idiosyncrasies, for all my shames, for all my fuck ups, for all my whatever. And then it's a lot easier to let other people into. Because if you're holding yourself to a certain standard where you're outside of your own heart, that's the standard you're going to hold to everyone else.
Yeah.
And then it's just more difficult.
Yeah, brilliant. That's so great. Yeah, I feel like I really only just properly, I feel like I knew it up here for so long, and then I only just had my felt experience recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just can't believe I'd been tripping for so long around it in a way. Yeah, now it just feels like it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Because I felt it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's that thing of, this might be a bit of a long example, and maybe we've spoken about this before, but, you know, when it comes to love, truth, transparency, whatever the thing is, there's like non-created light. So like the sun, it just naturally is. And, you know, the sun's not like, oh, I'm not going to put my light there. I'm not going to put my light there. I'm not going to, you know, it just shines. And whatever's in the shadow is in the shadow, and whatever's not, it's not. It's like unashamed, unconditional. It's just natural. And then we have like a neon sign that has to plug itself into something. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the time that's, you know, like can be anything that we idolize or look towards. Just in this example, like a false guru, for instance, that's, you know, maybe only there for their own reasons, maybe only there for their own ego. And it's like that can only take you so far. Mm-hmm. But when we're moths, looking, and we're all moths, I'm not saying that anybody is more or less mothy, but we generally see light and we fly towards it because we want it, whether or not we simply want that sun on our face. We all want to see truth, feel love, whatever the thing is. But when we're flying towards a neon sign, some kind of false representation that we think will solve our problems or save us, or if I was more like, you know, it's conditional, it needs to be plugged in. Yeah. And then, yeah, it's like that thing of we're never going to get satiated through that. But I always kind of try to bring it back and laugh at myself when I trip up. And it's that thing of if you were walking along the path and you were looking at a billboard and you happen to trip, sure, it might be a little bit embarrassing. You might skin your knee, whatever. But are you going to beat yourself up and put yourself out of your own heart because you tripped? It's like, oh, I was just looking at a sign thinking that was my thing and I tripped over. And it's like, if you can forgive yourself for tripping over like that, then we need to give ourselves permission to trip over in the love land, spiritual land, whatever, because it's just a trip.
Yeah.
You know less. Yeah, and if anything, that trip is really important because it showed you something, whether or not it was like, oh God, I wasn't even present because I was busy looking at the thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's like you wouldn't flog yourself for tripping over on a path. Yeah. So, but yet spiritually or whatever in the love land, we're like, oh, I'm so naughty and I can't believe I did and did, rather than like, it is mind blowing though when you're like, oh my gosh, I was tripping over so much, and you're like, oh, it is. So I get that, but I think the important thing is not to judge ourselves for that and just being like, okay, cool. Yeah. I've had skin knees for a while now and that might be getting tiresome, but don't bring out the whip. Yeah, 100% actually, which brings me to kind of like suffering. I touched on it in one of my last podcasts, and I was saying because I was suffering at the time and really deep in it, I was saying that it's important to suffer intelligently, but what I realized is that I was wallowing for too long, and it's like suffering definitely serves a purpose, very important, but I feel like, is there a time when you need a kick in the ass to get out of that? It's interesting because I guess from the perspective of there's no mistakes in the game, and maybe it was necessary for that person to wallow or to whatever, that it's like we don't really want to rush that process because you'll be ready when you're ready. Yeah, well, that's true as well. Yeah. But, you know, I quite like a kick in the ass. So, so it's that thing of I hope that the relationships around me are loving enough to kick me in the ass. Yeah. But I also hope that they're loving enough that if that other person isn't called to kick me in the ass, it's not their responsibility. It's still mine. Yeah. So I think both is true. Like, I think a kick in the ass can be really beneficial, but it's also that thing of, You know, when you fire an arrow into someone, if that's the kick in the ass, you want to make sure that that arrow is cleanly shot, the quick kill, sharp, all those sorts of things. Because I think a lot of the time people can try to shoot that arrow into you, but because it's so full of their own shit or what they desire for you or their judgments or this, that or the other, it can be really, you know, like, it can be really abrasive.
Especially when you're down.
Yeah. So it's that thing of, I think, if you're going to be the ass kicker, you just need to make sure that you're clean, have as much love as you can. And then I think it comes with the betterment of love to be able to actually have that penetrate. And they're my favourite arrows when someone sinks into me and I'm like, oh. But it has that cleanness behind it that there's like relief with the pain. Where you're like, and it makes you expand over contracting. But I think, that person will receive whatever they need to receive in their time. But I also think, you know, people like you and I can be a little bit impatient to clean out our stuff. And when we realise it's dirty, then we're like, well, oh my God, we need to spring clean now, stock take sale, all these other things, rather than being like, it's okay. I'm just walking my path.
That's it. Fuck, that was brilliant. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I wanted to touch on it again. Balancing the human and the spiritual experience, because last year I just found myself super just excited about all things spiritual. Lost my footing a little bit as well. Like we were saying yesterday, you end up a little bit like airy up in your head, and I'm now adapting the spiritual experience into the human experience and seeing them a little bit less separately, which is good. I wanted to talk about the side of that being a form of escapism. Could you touch on your thoughts in regards to that?
So I think you already nailed it when you said you're starting to see them less separately. I think that's a huge key. But it's, once again, no different to when we first start doing yoga. Things are tight, things are sore, things will get sore, etc. So everybody's so different. You know, there's some people that, you know, from a very early age, they're having a spiritual experience dominantly that they then have to try and like learn how to be in this world and reconcile that way. For other people, it's like, you know, you're a human first and then develop spiritually. So it can be different for different people in their path and the way that they have to do their dharma and figure out what's going on. So it's that thing of when we, you know, have a physical experience first, and then you realize there's all these other realms that you can dance in. It can be really addictive, no different to you might have lived in a tiny one-bedroom studio for so long, which is like the confines of being in a physical body, which is confining, there's suffering. Even the fact that we're in a physical body means that spiritually we're separate. We have our own identity, and there's something about us that always wants to go back to being part of that cosmic soup where we are connected. It's like fear's the illusion of separateness, but that's kind of what
fear is the illusion of separateness.
So that's kind of what being in a body is. So then when we realize, oh my gosh, I don't have to be confined to just this body, but we still want to remember that we have a body because we're having a physical experience. But it's a bit like going from that one-bedroom studio, moving into a 5-bedroom house and being like, oh my God, I have all this room for activities, you know, whether or not it's like, for me, I'm like, hell yeah, I'd have an art room and a library and all these other things. Then you've got to move back into the 1-bedroom unit when you come back to the physical body, and you kind of just ache to be back in that 5-bedroom place because you want to escape there, because it's either more safety, it makes more sense, whatever those things are, or maybe it's so painful for us to be in our body or in that 1-bedroom studio that it becomes complete avoidance of wanting to be there because this realm seems so magical or spacious,
Yeah.
or whatever that thing is that we're getting from this, rather than realizing that, you know, this, it's just an avenue to give us more scope. And when we come back to that studio, if you're really that unhappy with it, clean up your studio.
Yeah.
Like, clean up your physical life, whether that's your relationships, your actual physical body, the way you perceive the world on a physical plane. Yeah, it's just kind of addictive to go to magic and not actually sort out what's here. Or then because we can also, for some people, they reject the physical body, and, you know, my physical body doesn't matter, it's just this, it's just that. And, you know, in a way, aspects of that are true, but you were born into a physical body and you have a physical experience to live out, and like it or not, this is, as Ramdas says, this is your postcode. So you can, you know, you can go away, you can travel, you can visit other places, but you've got to come back to your postcode. Even if you're nomadic and your postcode happens to be changing, but you always go back to your caravan, or you always go back to the same shelter, or whatever the thing is, it's like there's so many different ways that you can adapt that to your life. But yeah, it's that I'm traveling and I don't want to go home. I don't want to go back to that physical. I don't want to go back to that whatever. And so the true freedom is when we're not resisting either. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. We don't resist our physical body. We don't resist spirituality. As you said, it's like we take the weight evenly of both.
That's true. It's funny that, because when I realized that I'd been so deeply in the spiritual, I was like, I'm shutting it down. I was like, no more of this. Like, it's all bullshit. And then I slowly eased back into it, and I was just like, you just don't have to be so rigid.
Yeah.
And it was just like, all these signs were coming out saying like, balance, balance, balance. And I was like, what is it that I need to balance? And I realized that it was the biggest thing. Just that, those two experiences. I feel as though one needs a healthy amount of ego to move through life and to make things happen. What do you think that kind of ego looks and feels like?
It's an interesting one, because I think that the word ego is used so differently in a lot of senses, but I think ultimately, just to almost backtrack a little bit, I think the ultimate aim of the game of having a healthy ego is freedom. It's not attachment, you know, and it's like, you don't want your ego, you know, so many people are down on the ego and that sort of thing, but it's like, it's just realizing that the ego is a necessary part of the human experience. You just want the ego to be in the passenger seat and you want to be in the driver's. And it's like the one that's like, hey, turn left or turn right or whatever, and then you use your own discernment to be like, hang on, what feels right to me, left or right, or whatever that thing is. That, to me, a healthy, balanced ego is one that accepts change, you know, we can adapt through that. Whereas a pathological ego, because the whole reason why that aspect of that part of our brain exists is to survive. So it's a lot of the time when it's getting in, I mean, different if it's like inflated ego, although actually it's the same thing. But basically, if the ego is overinflated, and whether or not it's operating on simply, you know, I'm about to fall off a cliff and I need to survive, or whether or not it's like social ego of, you know, being worried about being cut out from your friends, or, you know, whatever the thing is, pretty much when it's steering too hard and it's driving us rather than us driving it, we're not teammates anymore. It becomes like any abusive relationship where, you know, you domineer me, you tell me what I like, you tell me what I don't like, you tell me when to turn left, you tell me when to turn right, and I just don't question it as far as like, it. I think that is truth. Rather than noticing that and taking that into your equation, like, okay, ego, I hear you, I really don't want to fall off this cliff either. Or whatever the thing is, that we're just a little bit more balanced with noticing when it's kicking off, noticing when it's coming from control, noticing, okay, am I actually safe? Do I need to talk to that aspect of myself and be like, it's okay, I've actually got this, and this is what I'm going to do about it, whether that's from an intuitive sense or whatever.
Does that mean that we all are born with an overpowering kind of ego, or it just like expands till you have a realization and then you turn the cogs in a different direction, or is it just different for everyone? Or
It's interesting because I think that, like, in this human experience, I think it's a necessary part. It depends on your philosophy. I used to live with a yogi, I don't know, over a decade ago, and he taught me a lot. And he used to say to me, because he was coming from a karma dharma perspective, that no one's born innocent. Like, we are all born with our stuff that we have to play out in this life. So when people are like, oh, a child's so innocent, he's like, they're no more innocent or less innocent than us. It's just that maybe through experience we've picked up more baggage than that child. So we assume because we've picked up baggage along our way and our ego has developed, that child is more innocent. So I think when we look at from a soul perspective, I think you're born with it and it's already there. But then when we look at it individual to individual, it is interesting of, I guess, how that develops. You know, generally somebody that's grown up in a household that is more threatening to whatever, they will develop certain insecurities and certain ego-based things, whether or not it's, you know, I learned, in order to get out of these unsafe situations, I hide, I manipulate, I scream, I this, and then that becomes part of your amygdala of, like, then when you're facing conflicts that maybe are mirroring that or similar, you'll go to that default program of like, oh, in this situation I'll manipulate. Oh, in this situation I'll do this. Oh, in this situation I'll do that. Rather than backing myself that if I'm in my truth, here we are. I'm already safe. Even if that meant that you would punch me in the face, that's your problem. It's not actually mine. I don't need to make it my problem in order to manipulate your behaviour to do this or to do that or to whatever the thing is. But obviously that's a little bit more difficult in human practice, especially when you have had things like that. But it is also interesting of, like, you know, not even the case of abuse, of how some people, if they are over spoiled or, you know, kept as the princess or whatever, that they never actually learn how to do things for themselves because they're so used to being coddled or whatever, then equally you're going to end up with probably a sizable ego, but it comes from, well, I'm important, you need to do this. But largely underneath that, it's, I don't feel capable. Because maybe I've never made my own toast. Maybe I don't know how to boil rice, or like things like that, that it can end up being like this overinflated ego, but it's actually coming from, I'm scared, I don't know how to survive.
so it's the baggage.
Yeah.
The difference is the baggage.
Yeah, totally. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that. I like seeing it in that way. I want to talk a little bit about the shadow, because I'm absolutely engulfed with the shadow at the moment. I just find it so interesting now that I don't hate it. But it's taken me years to identify and understand some of the shadow aspects of my personality, mostly because I didn't understand the concept, but also because the disdain for some parts of myself was so strong that all I wanted was to escape them when they presented themselves. I've realised that so much magic lies in the shadow, basically. So would you feel comfortable describing your shadow and how it feels, firstly?
Yeah, I guess it depends of once again the term shadow, but I'm going to use the term shadow of the subconscious things that make me operate in a certain default thing that is not necessarily truth. Like, I'm not heading towards the sun. I'm heading towards the shade because I'm scared to let the light in. So we actually also spoke about this yesterday, but so one of my biggest things is like basically guilt for being born.
That's what I wrote here too. Guilt for breathing.
Yeah, it's funny. So it's like, for whatever reason, you know, it's that thing of, it's probably largely bigger than this. Like, I kind of believe that whatever role we have to play out, it's like life bingo. You know, we've got to a certain amount of things on the score chart that we have to kick off. So I feel like in this life, that's mine. Do you want context of like family background of where that came up, or not really?
It was more just like if there was a particular thing, like for example, I for so long have just like shunned like louder parts of myself, or the darker, the humor, like things like that. And I'm still grasping this whole shadow thing, but I'm just beginning to realize that like my personality and those things are actually things that people quite like.
Yeah, okay.
In a way.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's a shadow element or if it's just a trait that I've just completely like hidden. Oh, I haven't hidden it completely, but I've hidden it a lot, you know?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's that thing of, to me, anything that you want to tuck in the shadow that you don't believe it should be in light, whether that's being seen, letting it into your heart, whatever, you're sort of keeping it to the sideline. I guess in this example, it's like me sharing those aspects of myself that have been, you know, so unconscious throughout my life, even if I thought maybe they're there, or I thought I knew where they would come from, or whatever. The older I've got, the more that I realize I play out like my guilt for being here in doing.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of the more boxes I can tick, the more I can achieve. And I don't necessarily mean like A's on the scorecard. Like that used to be when I was younger, that it was like I had to be a good student, I had to get the best grades, I had to be the teacher's pet, I had to do the thing, whatever it was. Because I wanted to avoid all kinds of negative attention. So it was like if I got some positive attention, it was basically enough to survive and not be shunned or not collect extra guilt that I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
And then, later in my life, it's like, okay, I've got past getting the A's, but then I just like filled it with stuff. So the more stuff I do, the more I achieve, then maybe it's okay.
But there's a big passion in you to learn and to grow and to do and to like. I feel like the more you're doing, the more you're attracting as well. So there's a real big tick to that stuff too.
So that's the kicker though. There's always a positive and a negative, so to speak, for lack of a better term. Like every strength is a weakness, every weakness is a strength. Yeah. So it's no different to one of my strengths is doing, because it's like I do have 56 tabs, so it's like cool, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, I can do this. And but that's part of the pathology, is just because I can doesn't mean I should. Yeah. So, and because when you can do it all, you're like can do, and then your life just becomes all these can do's, rather than okay, what actually fills my heart. Yeah. Some of those things do for sure, and I actually quite like that about myself. It's no different to one of the things of this particular shadow of how it plays out on me is I live by survival on strategy. So a lot of the times the things that I'm doing has strategy, whether or not it's like renovating the house at the moment, and I'm like, cool, but if I pull out the bench, I might as well put new electrics behind that bench, because you know, whatever the thing is, everything becomes strategy. So then it's really hard to give up. It's really hard to give up strategy. I joke to Alistair about this. I'm like, oh, I got to give up strategy, but I'm like, it's so hard when you're so good at it. Like, and he'll even laugh at me, and he's like, you are so good at it. And I'm like, I know, that's the problem. Is then as well, because then that extra feeds my ego or whatever, because I am good at it, and because it's like, oh look, I can juggle 15 things, that you end up being a contortionist. Or I always say, for me, it's like, you know, like a cow eating the grass, that you're just like, yeah, cool, next bit. And if I eat this, that means that, you know, like, I don't have to worry about dinner, or whatever the cow's thinking. And then all of a sudden the cow looks up and you're like, fuck, what field am I in? Is this even my field? Or was I so into the, whatever the doing is, this task, that task, this task, this task, this task, this task, that there's no room for your heart. And then also the bad aspect of that is you're not really spending much time actually listening. And don't get me wrong, I feel like I listen well in conversation, all those sorts of things, but how much am I listening to those clairs? You know, how much room do I have to actually still myself to hear an answer, even if it is about a strategy, because I'm too busy analytically going, this puzzle piece fits here, that puzzle piece fits here, this, that it's like I'm just feeding that analytical side of my brain.
Yeah.
So it gets stronger.
Yeah.
And then the other side of my brain sort of gets left behind because I don't exercise that muscle.
Yeah.
So then I have to actively, to get out of that program, you know, at first it was like, okay, I'd write lists and then go, what is actually important, and making sure that there was something stilling or something that fulfilled my heart on that list as well. So that it's like, it's so dumb, but it's like that almost became the reward for myself for doing and then I don't do that as much anymore. I think it's like more so after practicing, it's like it, and don't get me wrong, it's still my addiction. I still do it all the time. So it's not that I'm free of that, but it becomes more obvious to me whether or not I feel depletion in my body, whether or not I'm feeling more, you know, one of the things about survival and strategy is it's easy to get frustrated because frustration is the world isn't the way it ought to be to me.
Yeah.
So if my strategy, whether or not I pull out that kitchen bench and then I'm like, fuck, I didn't account into the fact that now I'm going to have to cut through concrete or whatever the thing is, you get frustrated at those problems because it's not fitting your strategy.
Yeah.
And then you get all these like frustration points rather than just that openness of like, oh, cool, I'm going to have to drill through the thing. No worries.
Okay.
Like it's like getting more relaxed. So noticing when I'm frustrated, or then for me, it's like noticing the fatigue in my body that then I have to go, okay, cool. Why am I juggling these balls? What actually serves me? What actually fills my heart? What am I doing because of addiction to my head?
Yeah.
And then regroup of like, okay, cool. I need to at least have head and heart equal of what I'm feeding them or costing them.
Yeah. That's cool. I didn't realise that was the big addiction, the doing. But it's quite funny that being around you has been like, I was always a doer, but I feel like since being around you, I've been more like, hey, how can I do more things in the day, and how can I be more efficient? So it's funny how your thing is something that has bettered my life. I appreciate it. I've been asking myself questions lately, like generally when I'm processing things, I'm a bit of an internal processor because I want to make sense of it before I share.
Yep.
But through talking with you, I realised that sometimes I need to get over myself a bit and share. When communicating like your deeply personal monologue with anyone, do you ever notice shame coming up or any sort of ill feelings, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. I think largely I was more of an internal processor, so to speak. But then it's funny, the longer Alistair and I have been together, he's like, no, you're definitely an external processor. So whether or not I misjudge myself or whether or not I'm no longer as internal, I don't know. But one of the things for me is a lesson that I was fortunate enough to learn with Kurt was I had a truth to speak to a friend, and I was scared because I was like, I'm so charged around this that it has to be my shit. Yeah. And I don't want to walk into their house and spray shit everywhere that isn't theirs. In order to try and resolve this, but I was so stuck on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it's just there. And I spoke to Kurt about it, and I was just basically inquiring as to like, you know, do I need to finish processing this, and do I need to wait until the charge is gone?
Yeah.
Because when the charge is gone, then I'll be more rational, or, you know, more kind with my words, or whatever the thing was. And his advice to me was really good. So also though, he did say, little disclaimer, he's like, I'm telling you this basically because you've got your basics in order.
Yeah.
So for someone that doesn't have their basics in order and maybe doesn't even discern, you know, well, I just have to say it.
Yeah.
And it's coming from that real aggressive, hurtful place. So he's like, if you've got your basics in order, he's like, if you were called to say something, whether or not I just need to vent to someone and figure out my head or whatever the thing is. He's like, say it. And then he was like, if you feel like you need to go over there and speak to your friend, go over there and speak to your friend. And that's normally something that I'm quite brave with, but with this particular topic, I was really worried about causing hurt.
Yeah.
And and he was like, just go say it. And I'm like, yeah, but what if it's my shit? And I go over there and, you know, like, end up putting them down, destroy the relationship, whatever the thing is. And he basically said, any thoughts that we keep to ourselves will end up going moldy.
Yeah.
And it gave me the head analogy of, okay, if I had a moldy tomato in my fridge, would I keep it just in case I needed it? Or just in case I was worried to offend the bin, or just in case I was whatever. And it's like, no, if I had...
Offend the bin.
Totally. So it's like, if I had a moldy tomato, which is my moldy thoughts as I'm ruminating on them, just getting moldier and moldier and moldier, I would throw it in the bin. And still that thing of like, okay, cool, but what if it's my shit?
Yeah.
And he was like, so what? If it's your shit, you'll soon figure it out. So when you throw that moldy tomato in the bin, whatever the consequences, you just need to own it.
Yeah.
So if I go over there and say like, hey, I'm really upset by blah, 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 and it turns out that it's my shit, whether or not I realize in the moment that I'm speaking that, whether I realize a week later, whether I realize whatever, then my only responsibility is to apologize and own it.
Yeah.
As far as like, hey, I didn't realize at the time how much I was projecting, or whatever the thing is. And then it's up to them however they take it. Because if there's two of us in this situation, then whether the words are for that person or the words are for me, I need to birth them in order to figure it out. And then we figure out this thing together and to basically just hope that the other person has enough love in their heart that they can see that I'm not trying to actually hurt or harm. But if they do, if they take the stance that, you know, I don't like Rihanna, she's here to hurt or harm me, then that's okay, that's up to them. Because then they don't obviously, whether or not they're stuck in their own stuff, they don't have the capacity, or they're just purely offended, that's okay. I can't temper their experience. So I think it's a little bit the same of, I know that you were saying more internally and I'm speaking about a conflict situation, but I think either way, if it's so strong for you, like there's difference if you're like, oh, there's just something there and I need to sit with it yet because it doesn't even have form or whatever. But if there's something so strong within you, then I think it's really good to speak to somebody safe about it and just hope that that person has the heart to be able to hear you and know that, it's not there to hurt or offend. But I think that a lot of the problem with those things is we've got shame that we don't want to be seen, or I guess there can be many things with that, but largely it can also be this isn't perfect enough to have it analytically staged out, and therefore when I hand that product over to someone, I need it to be finished. But there's also, there's like shame about not being perfect, but there's also an element of like perfectionism in that, as in you might want to convince me that your shit is clean. Look, I had this whole pile of shit, but look, I've organized it in this row. And then, so because we want to be right, we don't want to be embarrassed, all those sorts of things. So for me, one of the things is when I feel that charge, I suppose, when I feel that charge coming up, I rip off Brene Brown, thanks Brene Brown, of, you know, if I don't know, like I am so like, I don't know how to process this, then I'll say to you, Alistair, whoever the person is, hey, this is the story that I'm telling myself.
And so brilliant the way she does that.
It's so great because then you're letting that other person know this is the story that's internally happening to me.
You separate yourself from it. Hey?
I know it's a story, but I can't help but think it's true at the moment, or whatever the thing is, so that you're not just like, you know, for instance, in my overdoing, Alistair will constantly try to temper me at that. But if I have 65 reasons for why this needs to be executed or whatever, and I can see he's trying to temper me, but in my head I'm like, dude, but if that falls down, it means the picture's off the wall, it means this, it means that, which might actually be true, or it might be a story, I don't know. Then I'll be like, hey, the story that I'm telling myself is that picture is going to get smashed unless it's on a proper screw. This, that, the other, blah, blah. And then he knows where my head thoughts are at. He can think, chances are it gives him a little bit more freedom to know what's in my head, not just assume, or not just be like, oh, Rihanna's in one of her moods again, or like, fuck, here she goes, or whatever, which he can still think if he wants, that's up to him. But it's no different to when someone else is internally processing. And if things, I love that Arnie Mindell line of, if things aren't given a legitimate outlet, they'll find an illegitimate route. So if we're not giving these things the legitimate outlet in whatever perspective, as healthily as we can, then it's seeping out the edges. So we think, yeah, I'm just internally processing, I'm doing this so I don't hurt everyone else in my house, or I'm just, but it's like, they still feel that.
Yeah.
And they don't know if you've had a shitty day at work, if you can't afford your rent, if you're whatever, da-da-da-da-da. So it's like, okay, the story I'm telling myself is, I'm really scared about not paying the rent this week. And that's why I'm which might be the truth, or it might be complete fallacy, but it's just letting that other person know, hey, this is where I'm at. Because when the other people that we're in relationship with, when they're left to assume, sometimes they can be correct with their assumptions for sure, but it doesn't help anyone. Or sometimes they could be completely incorrect with their assumptions. Like they might be like, oh my gosh, Cappy's so mad at me for when I spilt tomato sauce on her shoes a year ago. And you're like, dude, I forgot that even happened. I'm worried about keeping a roof over my head right now. I don't give a shit about your shoes. Like, whatever the thing is. Just to create clarity for this. Like, so for the meantime, I'm stuck in this story, just so you know. And then if you invite that person to give you reflection or whatever, then you've got a basis to be like, oh, okay, cool. All right, well, from my perspective, that's not your story at all. Or like, okay, cool. You know what, how can we pitch in and make that rent? Or, or even like, no, that's complete fallacy. You have your rent money, but this is one of your things about security or whatever. So, I think that there's benefits of both. Sometimes I think that there can be too many cooks in the kitchen, and some people speak about things a lot, and then especially if they're speaking about things to people that don't want to keep their kitchen clean either, and you having a dirty kitchen makes me feel better about my dirty kitchen. So when you're like, oh my God, this happens and that happens, then I'm going to be like, yeah, I know, Jimmy's the worst at that, isn't he? Like, and then we're feeding into it, we're validating each other's story. It's different between someone actually having the love to help you either expand that, whether that's with reflection, without reflection, space, whatever. But then also I think it's like part of the thing is sometimes when I'm like, oh, look, the story I'm telling myself is this, there's shameful aspects to it of like, oh, I can't believe I'm telling myself this. But there's something so relieving about telling the truth.
Well, it's airing it out, like Ali said.
And then you're getting the sunlight on it. And you're not keeping that in the shadow, because when we keep those things in the shadows, they seem so much bigger. Rather than, oh, once I shine a torch on it, I actually know generally what's there, even if I'm a bit surprised. Then we can actually deal with it, rather than just assuming it's dark, it's naughty, it's, oh, if I admit this, blah, blah, blah. But then that comes back to conditional loving of self. So if I'm giving myself conditions like I need to be enough, I need to be whatever the things are, then we're so scared of shining that light, because what if it doesn't meet my conditions? Because it mustn't meet your conditions if I think that's dirty. You know, that whole play, rather than just being like, hey guys, let's shine a torch on it and see what it is.
I love that. I feel like that's just such life-changing stuff, because it's over the holidays I kind of realised somebody asked me how I was feeling about a certain thing, and I hadn't processed it, I guess, and I was having trouble finding the words because I was still feeling the thing, and then I was just like, what I'm going to say. I just don't feel like it's going to come out as fully fledged as I'd like it to.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, I just kind of said what was there.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I didn't walk away with anything.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is what it is right now.
Yeah. And you can even say that in this present time, it feels like this, but I have no idea if more things are going to come out.
Yeah.
Because it's true, we don't. You know, it's like, presently, this is where I am. I can't speak to where I was or where I'm going. Or I mean, you can do that if you really want to, but what matters is this is how I presently feel.
Yeah.
And
I
then
like that.
letting some light on that, and then, you know, next present time it might shift or it might not.
Yeah. That's cool. That's like space, hey? I only really discovered that recently as well, just giving yourself space and not straight away going, this is all the things. Like, but, yeah, fuck, you said so many things in there where I was just like, that's brilliant, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think there's always been this underlying fear within me, like if I'm to attract a partner, that I'm not going to be able to communicate on the spot what I'm feeling, and I think it was just like a reminder that I can just communicate and be like, hey, it ain't fully fledged yet, because I just would never want to react in a way that well, let's be real, I'll react in ways that I'm not very proud of, but I don't know. I feel like in this present day off camera, well, could be on camera if it's valuable, but yeah, I don't even think I really have the capacity to do anything too stupid anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's that thing of what we were talking about earlier with, like, our only responsibility is when it is fully fledged, or if we have done something potentially quite unconscious, is to own it and apologise.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't want to be living in the past,
Yeah.
but if we have made a mistake that, you know, for instance, if we were in a romantic relationship and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you have forgot the milk and whatever, and then later I'm like, oh gosh, I was a bit unkind, uncaring, whatever it was, because I was worried about paying the rent or whatever the thing is, that I wasn't clear in my communication, that to come back to that and be like, you know, basically, sorry for my behaviour. I've got this story in my head.
Yeah.
I was telling myself this, but I realise that you forgetting the milk wasn't a big deal. I shouldn't have taken that personally.
Yeah.
Or whatever, that it's like, and I think the more that we acknowledge and apologise and those sorts of things, the less frequent that behaviour becomes, rather than me just going, well, you know what, it was shit that she forgot the milk, and, you know, I probably shouldn't have said that, but, you know, she should remember the milk.
Yeah.
That it's like, when we're stuck in that righteousness, I think that's the only time that communication really gets wrecked, is when we can't actually
talk.
Yeah, to and fro of like, hey, that wasn't fully formulated. Or I've even done it before where I've like ripped my heart out over something and been like, hey, I'm struggling with this, or like blah, blah, blah. And then 2 weeks later I'm like, and I thought that was the genuine cause or issue.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later I'm like, oh, fuck. That actually had nothing to do with it, because maybe that symptom is still here.
Yeah.
And I notice every time, like, also another one of my shadows is like rejection. So I feel like, you know, I was rejecting myself, which was making me feel rejected by you, taking this personally, etc. And then it's like, cool. And then we're learning about each other too, of, I'm sure you've had relationships where you communicate and maybe it's not received well, but then it comes out that that person actually does receive it. They just needed to process as well.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, giving yourself permission to do the same, that I don't need to be right the first time.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw a dart at the dartboard. I don't expect to hit bullseye.
Yeah.
If I do, fuck yeah. But if I, you know, miss a little bit, the more that I then go, oh, actually, then, you know, chances are we'll develop better aim.
Yeah.
I think giving yourself permission not to be perfect is huge.
Yeah.
Like what we also spoke about the other day of like, you know, the more that I being addicted to probably the intellectual, the more that I give myself permission to be dumb,
Yeah.
the more I realise I'm free. Because
That's
I
it.
don't have to be intelligent.
Yeah.
And then when I give myself permission to be dumb, I get to learn, I get to play like a kid, I get to
Yeah.
do all these things, that this environment is open rather than me judging it as that's less than,
Yeah.
and I already need to be together. Because
Yeah.
if I'm already together, then I'm worthy, rather than
Yeah.
being like, oh, fuck it, I'll play both sides.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just more fun.
Yeah, you touched on the rejection thing there, and that's a fucking big one. I feel like I've always felt rejected by everyone, like by the majority of people except my people. But then, big realization over the holidays, I was like, I've been rejecting myself in ways for so long. I think I come across as like extremely confident in ways, but there's been ways that I've just been suppressing for so long, and that's, I feel like that's just a big one for your folk listening. Just like, if you're not feeling completely accepted in your circles, it's like a good time to just suss the self.
If you need it, so it will be.
So beautiful.
Beautiful, darling.
Well, that is the end of the show. So
That's all, folks.
thank you. That's all for today. I got nothing.
But love.
Actually, no, I do want to say one thing. That if you came into this year slowly and you didn't get that normal wind that we get, it's okay. Because I came in quite slowly myself. Just want you to know that. And also, if you got thick in the holidays, that's also okay. Love and light.